Hey, everybody, this is Tom Siga from Duluth Pack, and this is the Duluth Pack podcast, Leader of the Pack. Our leader today is a true leader. He is the chairman of Grand Rapids State Bank and Minnesota Lakes Bank. It is Noah Wilcox, a friend of mine and a person I've done business with for quite a few years. So know him well. We're going to have some fun. Noah, welcome.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's really an honor to be on the show. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
Well, you know what? Thank you for being here, first of all, and let's have some fun, but let's learn all about you as we go along here too, because there's a lot of listeners who are in business or young people that would like to be in business, and your journey is so unique that I know our listeners will be just enthralled with hearing, what you have to say, because you have a really cool journey. So Noah, let's start back and just talk to us about where you grew up and what was your childhood like?
Sure. It's a formative part of where I am today. It's, it wasn't always easy. I was born in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, but I was largely raised by a single mother in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. A mom that was working 3 and 4 jobs at times just to try to make ends meet. And, I mention that because I think it has shaped my work ethic from a very early age. I was about 3 years old when that all went down. And by the age of 12, I had my first job. I'm sure it wasn't legal. The place was paying me under the table to wash dishes, but a lot of those dollars were going to pay for rent and food and things like that. So, I look back on that as a much more mature adult and a parent, and think, that really, those years were formative in my approach to hard work, go get it, anything's possible. And I can remember telling myself at some point in my teenage years, like, I don't ever want to live like this for the rest of my life. I don't want to be, trying to figure out where the next meal's going to come from. I've got to do better for myself. And I think that's just something that's a part and parcel of my being and has led to where I am today and the journey that it took to get there. And I've shared that story with a number of different folks over the course of my career.
Noah, where did you go to college, and what did you're obviously worked your way up through banking and now you're the chairman, but you went to college, and what did you major in? And at that time, did you also know that at some point, maybe I'd want to go into the family business?
Well, that's a good question. Also a very formative part of how I got here. I'm the oldest of 5 children. And as you might imagine, being the 4th generation of the family to potentially carry on the family business, there is a tremendous amount of pressure placed on me to get a business degree and come back to the family business. And, I'm a pretty independent individual. You know this because we're friends. You don't really have to worry about what's on my mind because you're going to hear it, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And, I think all that pressure really made me chase other dreams. I do have a passion for art and music. I enrolled at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. I was a painting and photography major for 2 years. And I kind of approached my college career backwards. I did my junior and senior coursework years 1 and 2. And when the school informed me that I had to go back and take all these remedial general liberal education requirements like accounting and, business math and all these things, I really took some time off and did some really deep soul searching. Like, am I better off preserving my art as a hobby and chase something else? And long story short, I wound up transferring to the University of St. Thomas and pursuing a major in business management and finance. And strangely enough, I found out that, numbers have an art to them as well. And I was naturally gifted with them, and really just sort of fell in love with the numbers component of things, statistics and economics in particular, along with business law. And, hustled through that, made up the time I had taken off, graduated on time. And I wound up working for a big regional bank that was at the time based out of Minneapolis, much to the chagrin of my family, probably. They were very eager to get me to come back to the family business. And I went and worked for this large bank, started out in the Minneapolis market. Not long after I'd been there, was asked to moved to Chicago for them, where I ran multiple offices for them for a number of years, and then was asked to go down to the Southeast, where they had a number of states with a big operation that they're trying to figure out what to do with. So here I am, this probably mid-20s-year-old kid, and me and another guy get sent down there to cover, I don't know, 20 offices or so. And it's like, figure out which ones we're going to keep open, which ones we're going to close, and how much of the portfolio we're going to sell. I mean, it was a tremendous opportunity. It probably would have scared the daylights out of most people. And instead, for me, it was really an exciting opportunity to do something big. And, you know, I think somewhere in the back of my head, I probably thought, if I ever went back to the family business, maybe it's better to make some of these mistakes, you know, out in the open instead. But good news was we did a good job, didn't make many mistakes, moved back to Chicago. And ultimately, it was just, you know, I loved the whole business of banking and the whole customer aspect of it. But this big bank business model, and you and I have talked about this before, I just couldn't stomach it anymore. It was cutthroat. The company didn't care about their customers. Frankly, the company cared very little about its employees. I mean, if you weren't hitting quotas, you were out. It didn't matter if you'd been there 10 years. And so I formed a consulting company and started doing consulting work primarily in the financial services industry and on a number of different things, leading small projects, project management, some technology projects, things of that nature. When I got a call from my uncle up in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and he said, "Hey, you know, we'd like to hire you to manage a few projects." This was late 90s. You know, we want to implement internet banking, but we don't know anything about it. We want to image the back end of the business, but we don't know how to do that. And I made it clear to my father, and my grandfather that I was coming back as a contract employee. I was to take the job, and that's it. Then I'm moving on to the next client. Well, I've been there ever since. And so in some sense, you know, all roads lead home. And I think at that stage of my life, Tom, what was really unique about that experience, probably just a couple weeks into that project, I remember walking into the main bank lobby, and I just had this epiphany, like, oh, I totally understand why Russell has worked for us for 50 years. I understand why this customer is a third generation customer of our business. And that's what was missing for me when I was working for that big bank, this symbiotic relationship between the community and the business doing good to make the community thrive, the community being, you know, loyal and wanting to bank local and feeling appreciated in the relationship component of the business. And I fell head over heels in love with the business model. And that's why I've never left. And it's why I poured my heart and my soul into this business. And, you know, sometimes it's difficult to separate, you know, what part of it's home life, what part of it's office life. And you know that all too well, but it's, I couldn't have made a better decision. It was something that really panned out exceptionally well for me. And it, you know, the old saying goes, you know, if you like your work, you don't work a day in your life. And I love my job, and I'm eager to get out of bed in the morning and get to it.
You know, Noah, one of the things, and I know you, and for our listeners, they need to know that I know you and I've done business with you, is, you know, you're talking about big multinational banks and you know, I'm not slamming them, but do they know us by name? And I know that when I walk in the front door of your bank, people actually know my name and welcome me. And that's one of the things that I've noticed with you. And if you can talk about that, and you alluded to that, hey, your epiphany that you had when you walked in, and it's like, holy cow, wait, I'm kind of home here. This is the stuff that I was missing and frustrated me about where I was. And now I'm home here. Can you talk about that? And we'll get into a few other things. You know, you were the chairman of the ICBA and whatnot. We'll talk a little bit about that. But how important it is to you about the relationships, and people have a name, your customers have a name, the third generation, like you talked about right there, and the importance that, yes, it's important to the customer, but how important is that really to you and your banks?
Well, I think being a family-owned business, I mean, let's make no mistake, we are a for-profit entity, and that is the deal, and that will never change. But we do have the luxury to balance our focus a little bit differently than some companies are able to do, meaning we're not 100% focused on driving shareholder value. It's a very important pillar of what we do, but equally as important to me philosophically is how our staff feels treated, for example. I mean, I think of these people that work for us as family, Tom. Every decision I make, most of the people that work for us are the primary breadwinners in their family. So every decision I make has the potential to affect them and their significant other or spouse, their kids. And I don't take that lightly. It's a very large responsibility, and I care deeply about it. And I love these people like family. And the same is true about our customers. Dealing with financial matters, whether it's running a business, buying a home, selling a home, buying your first car, whatever it is, it's a daunting, stressful situation for the customer, whether they convey that to you or not. In most instances, it is. And they are seeking somebody that they can trust, somebody that can guide them, somebody that can make this easily understandable. And I think that's our job. We are there to make it easy to understand and consult with them so that the transaction, whatever it is, feels really seamless. It takes the angst out of it. And I've just never forgotten that. I mean, one of the favorite parts of my job is talking with our customers and either hearing their stories. I mean, I get people that come in and talk about my great grandmother all the time, or my grandfather. And I love hearing those stories, but we hear just as many now in the wake of PPP through the pandemic. I mean, literally, I've had customers crying in the lobby, thanking us for saving their business. Without you, we wouldn't be here, and it would have destroyed everything. We would have lost our home. We would have had to left the area. And those are moments in time. But I think when you stack those up over the course of 25 plus years in just this business with our family company, it's remarkable the kind of momentum that brings to the forefront of how you make decisions about the company, how you decide to reinvest in the areas you serve. I mean, I highly encourage 100% of our staff to volunteer their time. If nothing else, get involved with an organization you care about and give back, because we do work hard to attract and retain the brightest and the best, but the community should still benefit from those people in other ways. And I mean, sure, we give money back and things like that, but I think supporting the community and doing it because it's the right thing to do, not because you want a pat on the back or an ad in the paper, is really important. And I think that's been a largely successful part of our business model.
Noah, as the president, CEO, and chairman of a bank, and in your case, two different banks, what's a daily, and I know this is a loaded question, but really, what are your responsibilities? And secondly, what does a typical day look like? Because your product is money, which is so foreign to most of us that sell something that is a widget, and it's your product is very different to us. So we can, as a layman, can grasp some of that. What does a day look like for you?
Well, most days are not the same, and community bankers wear a lot of different hats. I mean, I can be found, hauling cases of paper to the basement when they get delivered, or closing on a $5 million loan. I mean, and everything in between. Big responsibilities for me, of course, are maintaining relationships and working with the Federal Reserve Bank, which we're a member of, the FDIC, and the state of Minnesota Department of Commerce. It's a very highly regulated business, as you know, and we've talked about. It's ever changing, so staying on top of those changes is important. So you're not working from behind, but you're ahead of the ball. And I sometimes find myself in the rare position that I want to have really good relationships with the regulatory authorities, and I really want to be sure we're playing by the rules. We have a very heavy compliance, top-down culture in our business, because if we do that, then I can focus on my customers. I don't have to worry about arguing with the regulators all the time. And I think that's been very successful for us. So navigating those things, monitoring all the different areas of the business, whether it's lending operations, the back office, to be sure that we're in compliance, working with our compliance team, our marketing team, our auditors, and all the other outside partners that we use to help make sure this all goes. I mean, that is a large part of what a day in the life of Noah Wilcox looks like. Now, when I get a really good day, I get to spend some time shaking hands and having conversations, or even better yet, getting out on business development calls. I'm a people person at heart. I love to talk about our business. I love to make dreams come true. And, whenever I can get with a customer and be talking about that, it's really special. The last downturn in 2008, that triggered such a huge wave of new regulations that came out. And prior to that, I spent a lot of time with customers. I used to joke that I was like the Walmart greeter of community banking because I spent more time in the lobby than I spent in my office. That crisis really put me back behind the desk because the job did become much more administrative. I don't manage a lending portfolio anymore as a result of that. I mean, I'm all there alongside my lenders, but they're doing the heavy lifting on those pieces. So it has changed, but it's still enjoyable, and we still get to bring. You say we deal in money, we do, but we really deal in products and services that should be making people's lives easier and in some cases more efficient.
I mean, banks allow us as business and somebody who owns a couple of small businesses, with lines of credit and whatnot, we can't do what we do without you because, we don't have pockets full of cash to sit there and fund our inventories and raw materials and everything as manufacturers or things that we have on the shelf. So definitely, I hear what you're saying. Can you go back and this is really for people who may not understand, some of the regulatory items that you're talking about. So you have your lenders, but then you also have underwriters and then the regulators. How does all that symbiotically work together behind the scenes that we, as the people taking out notes, don't really see? Can you explain a little bit of that in layman's terms, if you can?
Yeah, I think it really starts with, sort of a consistent culture of education internally to be sure that all the members of the lending team really are aware of sort of those tripwires or the hot button issues of the day, whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of regulations, but I mean, there are always hot button issues, and we talk about those on a regular basis. And, so, I mean, an application comes in, it's going to get underwritten. We're going to pull credit. We're going to look at cash flow. We're going to look at credit history, all those kinds of things. And then, we actually have a very collaborative environment internally. I mean, a lot of banks, a lender might just have their legal lending limit, and underneath that, they just do whatever they want. And our lenders do have legal lending limits, but we really look at every deal as a group. Most of the time it's done electronically and it's very efficient, but we don't have any two lenders that think the same. So, I mean, you can put a solid A deal on the table and somebody's going to go, anybody think about maybe structuring it this way? It might work a little bit better. And I think that that's something that sets us apart. And it also drives credit quality sort of internally to be sure that you don't get a rogue lender. And I mean, we've had that issue over the years where, somebody just has their own niche of stuff, and you can either develop a concentration, you can develop a concentration of poor credits that lead to losses, things like that. So, I mean, it really is about education and following a process. And all of that just needs to happen in the background. The customer doesn't need to hear that stuff. And that's where we try to just take that sort of component away from it. And here's what we need from you. And then here's your options.
So what is the position of an underwriter then, and what do they do?
The primary position of underwriting is to gather the documents they need to evaluate the creditworthiness of either the individual or the small business, and then to make some recommendations on structure. The lenders, I mean, we're a pretty small shop, so I mean, a lot of our lenders are doing the underwriting. Sometimes it's a credit analyst doing the underwriting. But I mean, that it's a very important process of the loan process itself. Underwriting is probably the most important because that's where the judgment call gets made on, does this fit the risk profile or the risk appetite of the bank, or doesn't it?
So Noah, I want to go on to some of the history in your fourth generation, and we'll come back around to, let's see, it would be your great grandfather. at the bank, but let's first touch on the Independent Community Bankers of America. You were the chairman, and I do recall at one point when you were chairman, incoming chairman, that you and I ran into each other in Washington, D.C. by happenstance and ended up having dinner. I was actually testifying at Capitol Hill on behalf of small business, and you happened to be there for a whole separate reason, and that was for the Independent Community Bankers of America, when this was in the 2007, 8, 9 period, when all the banks were getting clamped down for regulations and regulations stacked on regulations on banking because there was a few big bad actors out there. And so you were testifying on behalf. Can you tell us what is the Independent Community Bankers of America, and what does that do for the smaller community banks like your banks?
Sure. The United States of America, Tom, is unique, and it is the only country on the planet that has a community banking sector. Lots of countries would like to have a community banking sector or something like it, and they just haven't been able to pull it off. So we're unique in that regard. And the Independent Community Bankers of America is the only national trade association that will exclusively represent community banks. So, if a big Wall Street bank, and one of them has characterized itself as the largest community bank in the country, which couldn't be any more further from the truth, applied for membership, it's just they don't qualify. And it's hard to define a community bank. And if I had to define it, I would say it really revolves around this relationship-based business model, and knowing your name when you walk through the door. So they are advocating on a litany of issues. I mean, things that never hit the media. I mean, there's been an issue with, I think there's 38 states now where marijuana is either legally, medicinally, or recreationally, and there's a federal law that prohibits financial institutions like mine from dealing with anybody that's related to the marijuana business. And I'm not saying marijuana should be legal or not legal. The association doesn't have a position on it, and I'm not going to get into that topic. But the point of it being is I could have a customer that owns a fourplex, and somebody living there could be working in a marijuana related business and paying the rent, and a portion of that is paying the mortgage for my customer, and I am now in violation of federal law. So we have been advocating to create a safe harbor of sorts. I mean, that's just one really arcane example of some of the stuff that goes on that never hits the media, and unless you're in the throes of it like me, you just never see. And I learned early on that if I don't carry my own water, nobody's going to carry it for me. I mean, I never could have imagined in a million years, Tom, that I was going to have to get politically active when I started working for the family business. But I figured out real quick, if I don't, if you're not on the menu, you're on the table. And, the largest banks in this country, they just, their goals and their lines of sight don't align with the goals and lines of sight that the community bank sector has. And so I thought it's important to give back, number one, to the industry that's been so good to my family for over a century, but to protect our way of banking and protect our business model. So ICBA does that day in, day out, nationwide, but headquartered in Washington, D.C., to make sure that that's happening when I can't be there. But those of us that are in volunteer leadership with ICBA do spend a lot of time in Washington, working with members of Congress, all the various agencies, the administration, Treasury, and all the rest of it. And similar to how we ran into each other out there, we were doing very similar things for two separate industries. And at the end of the day, a community bank really is like any other small business. They have their set agenda of things that they need help with, and maintaining those relationships in Washington has become vitally important to protecting it, what we do.
I know when I was out there, one of the things that I testified about happened to be banking, because at that time, with some of the bad actors that were there during the recession, so many rules had changed that when small businesses like ours needed money, the rules got so daunting that we could get the money when we needed it. And my joke to literally a whole bunch of senators was, you guys have made it so tough for us to get money when we need it. and so easy for us to get money when we don't need it. The whole recipe is backwards, and the relationships don't seem to matter as much anymore when they did in the past, because people knew you as a person, they knew your history, they may have known your family, all of those things. And that's what I was talking about. And I remember when you're having dinner, you're saying, well, those are the things we're working on the other side of things that, you know, most people don't actually hear about or know about. So that's,
yeah, and you're exactly right. That was a time where keeping the regulations behind the scenes, especially for small business customers, was really difficult because Congress was making it difficult. I remember in 2010 telling a team of examiners in my bank, like, time out. You guys realize we're in the risk management business, correct? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what banks do. You want me to have zero risk. I can't survive with zero risk. We have to have some amount of risk that's appropriate and that is in line with the appetite of our shareholders. And you have to let me do that. And if we can't do that, then we can't help all these small businesses that you're asking us to help, but the regulations say we can't help. So, I mean, it was very frustrating. You know, my dad retired right before all that happened. And I mean, to this day, I'm still like, I don't know how you pulled that golden ticket for a date. I mean, it's just ridiculous. He just dropped out and that's it. So good.
By the way, a great man. And I met you through your dad because your dad wanted some passport wallets that would go around his neck, and stopped in our shop. And from there, our relationship started and built from there. What a small world, if you say that. So Noah, let's take a step back in time. You are fourth generation. Let's go back to your great grandfather. And what did he have in mind?
Well, you know, it's an interesting story because the bank, Warba State Bank was the original name, in Warba, Minnesota, was started by two guys from Montana. And I don't know, that they had the vision that Warba was going to be like the next crossroads of the Mississippi or something. And they had 2 or 3 hotels, they had the bank, all the saloons in town. And they had a number of other banks in Minnesota. And they had some trouble with their banks in Montana, and they decided to pull up stakes in Minnesota and go back to Montana and focus on their business out there. And my great grandfather was literally driving a team of horses in the brickyard in Warba. And this guy, A.A. Hall, came and said, how'd you like to work at the bank? And reportedly, he said, beats the hell out of driving a team of horses in the brickyard. That's how he got hired. So that was just a couple of years after the bank was founded. Well, then about 2 years later, this whole sell-off happened, and he was able to cobble up enough, you know, partners and some of his own money to buy the bank. And the Wilcox family had its first generation as a community banker, and he was the only employee. He was the janitor, he was the teller, he was the lender, he was the security officer. My great grandmother Cecilia, who would go on to work in the bank until she was 90 years old, would mind the store when Claude had to go out and call on a customer or do something like that. And he moved the charter to Grand Rapids in 1936, and it's probably the single most important business decision that's happened in the course of our business. I don't know that the bank would still be alive in Warba. We do lots of business in Warba, but it would be hard to be headquartered there, just given its size and its location. But it's an interesting story. And my great uncle Monroe, my grandfather's brother, was kind of destined to come back and run the bank. He'd gone to college and he was conscripted into the war, killed in the Battle of the Bulge. Claire was down in the South Pacific in the Navy. And he was about 6 years in when that happened. And so they petitioned to get him out of the Navy, which they did. And he came back. And shortly after he came back, my great grandfather had a heart attack on a vacation out to see his wife's family. And somehow Claire, not knowing a darn thing about the business, convinced the board of directors that he could run the business. I mean, my grandmother would tell these stories of him not coming home till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning because he was working balance sheets and income statements backwards, trying to figure out how it all worked. And I mean, he was high school educated, but he'd never gone to college and didn't really have a lot of exposure to the family business. And so they gave him a shot at it. And he spent the next, I mean, at that point in time, the family really didn't have control because they did have to take on some shareholders when they moved the charter in 1936. And Claire kept after the guy that owned the most shares, that if he ever passed away, he'd get first rights of refusal. And finally, that guy came to a board meeting and handed him the document. And about 2 weeks later, crashed his car up on the North Shore. And Claire was in the position then of having to run out and figure out how to cobble together enough cash to save the family business, which he did, and asked his mother, my great grandmother, to come in and help with the bank. And I asked him once, I said, why did she work till she was 90 years old? And he said, well, about 5 or 6 years after, she was there and I really had a good handle on the business, I told her that she didn't need to come to work every day. And she looked at me and said, you're just trying to get rid of me. And he said, we never had that conversation ever again. And she was affectionately referred to as grandma by the whole community. People would come in. She worked right out in the main lobby. They'd come in. Hi, grandma. I mean, just such a great part of our story. And, my dad and his brother came in the early 70s and started running things. My dad eventually took the reins as the president, and we've talked about how I got there. So, we've got 5th generation daughters that are, working summers as tellers and things like that. And one can only hope we can get one more generation deep, but we'll see.
That was going to be one of my questions is, do we see 5th generation on the way, Noah?
Well, I always say hope's not a strategy, but I hope so.
That is awesome. And you know what? That story you just told right there is really riveting, because you talk about people think of banks and they think of big fancy buildings and they think of just a lot of money and stuff. And it wasn't always that way. And community banks generally aren't that way. It's not this opulence. It's more like, hey, we roll up our sleeves and get the job done. And we're small community banks. So that's really cool. And thanks for sharing that story, because, pretty riveting when you talk about 4th generation and now 5th generation working summers while they're in school and whatnot is pretty crazy. So before we go on, because then I want to talk about COVID, because I know that flipped every person's life, but also every business upside down. But let's talk about then. So one bank's not enough, Noah. So now we talk about the acquisition of Crow River Bank, which you have changed to Minnesota Lakes Bank. And it's not in the area here. It's it's 2.5, 3 hours away from where I'll call the mothership of Grand Rapids State Bank. What fostered that?
From a strategic standpoint, the underlying driver was long-term independence. And, a number of years really before the 2008 recession, we were looking at, median ages in the communities we serve and finding that a lot of the populations were both aging and also declining. And you start adding it up and you go like, at some point, there's going to be an inflection point for the business of where it's going to be harder to continue to grow and harder to continue to be able to afford the kind of technology and all the things we need to be successful in serving the customer. And we didn't go looking for a specific area other than to say we wanted to stay in the state of Minnesota. What we really started to look at were data points like a range of median ages and how consistent over time that median age was, the kinds of deposit dollars in communities and how stable or not it was, the kinds of industry in the communities. And really, I mean, there were scores of those kinds of data points, but it narrowed down our markets rapidly. And you just, in working with your accountants and legal firms and all the rest of it, everybody knows that you're at least open to looking. And Crow River State Bank at the time had a president that was retiring, had a chief operating officer that was getting close to retirement. The owner was really not a banker. He lived primarily in Arizona, and I think it was more of an investment for him. And he just didn't, we shared an accounting firm, not the same team, but they just put us in a room one day and I said, well, why do you want to sell it? He goes, I just don't have it in me to go find a president and really to put together a new management team. And, how much longer can I really do this? And So I made him an offer, and of course, like all good bankers, and I'm sure I'd be included in that, thought it was worth a lot more than that. So he went and marketed the bank, and I was I got a package. Everybody got a package, and I'm the only one that got called to the dance. And it's been an exceptional fit for us. The kinds of communities we're in, Mound, Delano, and Buffalo, where we have physical locations, are not dissimilar to Grand Rapids and some of the other communities that we operate in. Predominantly blue collar, a lot of manufacturing industry, plenty of heavy retail. We service the whole West Metro, and I mean, really, we service the state, in a large way. But it's been a very good offset for us. And I think long-term strategically, when I look at the kinds of efficiencies that we are immediately able to bring to the table, like, our existing HR team being able to provide HR resources to two charters, our existing IT team being able to do the same thing, marketing. I mean, there's a number of those where you can deploy those resources effectively and efficiently. And there were even some things that Grand Rapids was set up to do that Crow River had previously outsourced. And, we were able to bring income to Grand Rapids while cut Crow River's, or now Minnesota Lakes banks, cost in half in some cases. So, there were a lot of synergies like that we could see in doing our due diligence right out of the chute that we knew would be effective. Buying a bank is not child's play. I learned a lot of lessons along the way because we had never done it before. But at the same time, we were able to preserve independent community banking in 3 special communities and the surrounding areas. And in some cases, like the Mound market might have been left with nobody other than a big bank. And that was a big passion point too, is we want to preserve that local choice.
So, Noah, I remember, in what year was it that you did purchase?
We purchased it in 2014 when we were celebrating the centennial of Grand Rapids State Bank.
Because I remember having conversations with you, and you were always in the car. And one day in that conversation, I said, so how many days a week are you down, west of the Twin Cities, and how many days a week are you in Grand Rapids? And I very succinctly recall you saying, this week I'm in down in the cities Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and in Grand Rapids on Tuesday, Thursday. And oh, by the way, it's almost 3 hours between these. And you were getting up very early in the morning. And we were chuckling because I said, well, you're going to have to get a car loan because you're burning up a lot of cars.
Yeah, that first 6 months, I spent a lot of time in a hotel and a lot of time in the car. And, I don't know that I'd do it differently because the president did retire and left as a condition of the sale. And I was in the process of trying to hire a president, but in order to do that, delayed that as long as I could, like 6 or 7 months, to sort of say, like, what is the skill set we actually need in here? Because it doesn't look exactly the same as Grand Rapids. And my job as president, CEO, and chairman looks different than a president in a bank where I'm not present every day. And so that was part of all of that back and forth. But it was, it was a heavy lift. I was pretty tired by the time we got the first president hired, and I didn't have to be there every other day. So I've got a much better visitation schedule these days than back then.
How important was it for the faith that you had in your team in Grand Rapids at the time, that you knew all of these people, you had hired these people, this was your team there, for you to be not present in Grand Rapids for that first few years?
Absolutely critical. I mean, if I hadn't built the kind of team I had in Grand Rapids, I don't know that I could have done it. In fact, I've said this to them. I mean, I not only could I have not bought the bank, I could not have spent the kind of time away from the bank I did as I was going through the chairmanship of ICVA. I mean, you're just out of the bank too much. And, with their help, we were able to successfully buy the bank. And I mean, the senior staff and others were critical in getting alignment with policies, procedures, just sort of sort of setting the tone for the kind of culture that we've developed in Grand Rapids that we wanted to implement at Minnesota Lakes. And I mean, that's a heavy lift. I mean, the bank, when we bought it, was, I would just say, undermanaged. And it wasn't, in any kind of trouble. It's just that there was nothing but upside. And you just like, how fast can you turn the dial without, killing people? Because you just look at all this opportunity, and it's, you do have to learn to be patient and take it in chunks that people can accomplish without feeling totally overwhelmed.
So Noah, you do all of this, and then we all get hit with this really fun thing called COVID. And how did that affect your business, your banks in specific? We know the businesses all got affected, but how did your banks get affected, and how did you navigate that?
Well, it's interesting because I had just been instilled as the chairman of ICBA. I think it was March 19th or so in 2020 in Orlando, Florida. I think we had to be the last large scale convention in the country. And flying home on a plane that was maybe 10% occupied, and driving home from the airport, I got my executive team on a call, and I said, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what this is going to look like. We're hoping for a couple of weeks, but it looks bad, and people are freaked out, and the media is only stoking that fire. And we made a decision on that phone call to make the lobbies closed to appointment only. According to my contact at the Federal Reserve, we were the first bank in the 9th Reserve District to do that. We mandated that anybody that worked for us that had underlying health conditions had to either work remotely or just go home. And then all others that could work remotely, we asked them to do that. So we were really down to tellers, some back office staff, and lenders, or the lending team, I should say. So we had a large portion of the workforce out of the bank, and that I think it was a good move for us early on, because we're a small shop. I mean, we don't have hundreds and hundreds of employees. I mean, you could have a 2 or 3 person department that's critical to the operation of both banks and wipe them out with COVID in 2 days, and then what? All of your offices are just closed, and the customers can't transact on anything. I mean, that's where we would have been. So, I mean, it was about operational continuity. That was a main driver for that decision. And then we had to try and figure out, okay, now how do we, and the genie's out of the bottle, we're going to have to deal with that on the back end. That can wait a couple of months. But, how do we manage people? How do we hold them accountable? How do we be sure that things are getting done the way we need it to get done? And I mean, putting policies in place for remote work after people are already remotely working. I mean, it was a scramble. And I think we learned a lot about our business, though, because as heavily tech forward as we have been historically, I think we discounted our own ability to embrace new technology. And I think we discounted our customers' ability and their willingness to uptake new delivery channels. And it was so seamless overnight to be, closing loans digitally, to be having management meetings daily via Zoom instead of in person, to doing all of the morning officer meetings that we've done for over 100 years the same way. And all of a sudden we're doing them either via email or via Zoom or via, other electronic platforms that we have. And, the customer base surprised me the most. I mean, I could set my watch by some of these people because they come the same time every day and there's a routine to it, and it just stopped. It was so weird. And most of that's remained the case. I mean, they got into this more efficient delivery channel and they're like, I really like this. I don't have to go to the bank twice a day, every day, 6 days a week. And so, it's been a learning curve about, do we have the best of breed product? We think we do, but we have to continue to validate that to provide the kind of experience that we want to provide our customers. And then, how else can we help them? How else can we be more efficient internally? I mean, one of the first things I said to my lending team as we started closing loans digitally was, give me a plan for how you're going to spend all that extra time you have. I mean, is it 50% on business development? What are you going to do with it? Because you just took a 30-minute loan closing and turned it into a 30-second transaction. So what are you going to do with the extra 30 minutes? And so, it did allow us to sort of reimagine how people use their time, how tasks are distributed across the organization, and we still have, you know, a smaller, much smaller portion of the team that either works remotely or works hybrid, and it's working great for us. And if there is a challenge hidden in there somewhere, I think it is the challenge of maintaining culture, and that's something that has always been very important to me, and it's taken a lot of extra work to try to, you know, keep that flame lit when you have you know, more locations than you used to because people are working remotely.
Noah, how about security? Because obviously, if you guys are doing paperwork for people that are going to be giving you a lot of personal information and digitally, and then you have to close a note, close a loan digitally, how does security come into play there? And did you have to invest in deeper security than we've ever had?
You know, we actually already had made significant investments in technology that would allow the secure transfer of all kinds of sensitive documents. So that piece was there. The thing we hadn't, and I don't, you know, I guess there was no pressing need for it, was we didn't have the platform in place to digitally close the loans or digitally sign other documents. And I think within about 48 hours of closing our office, if you can believe that, we were up and running. And I mean, that just is amazing. And so you know, we've always been very heavily focused on security, physical security, but cybersecurity in particular, security of our customers' non-public information. And I think we were really well positioned in that regard, and that was, you know, a benefit to us to be able to just move as quickly as we did. And you know, I let my fellow community bankers know, hey, just letting you know this is what we're going to do, and if you like the idea, great. If you don't, I understand. And I think within about 2 weeks, not just in our communities, but about every banker I knew were on a similar program to what we were doing.
So folks, today our special guest is Noah Wilcox. He is the president, CEO, and chairman of Grand Rapids State Bank and Minnesota Lakes Bank, and chairman of Independent Community Bankers of America. Boy, that's a mouthful. Holy cow, you've been one busy guy. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a relax. We're going to take a deep breath here. Woo, we don't have to think so much about work here. We're going to deep dive on you just a little bit. We're going to go to what we call our packed question segment. So we're going to rapid fire a few questions for you because we just want to get to know you a little better. Favorite vacation destination? I think I know this one because I read your newsletter and you had an article on one of your favorite destinations in an article.
Well, you know, it's hard for me to pick one. I do have the wanderlust, that is for sure. And, you know, I've spent time in amazing places. You know, maybe instead of my favorite, I'll give you a couple top ones. We took our daughters gorilla trekking in Uganda in February of 2019, and then on a photo safari in Kenya in the Mara Triangle area, which was just fascinating. You know, my wife and I loved the South Pacific. We were just down at a French Polynesia earlier this spring to get away from the never-ending Minnesota winter that just wouldn't let its grip go. So, I mean, really, it's I love all parts of Europe. I just like being on the go and experiencing new things, but those are some of my top ones.
Noah, biggest fear?
You know, it's an interesting question because it's one I've been asked before. I really see fear from a different angle, and it is about whether I'm emotionally in control of the situation or not. And, you know, fear I mean, I'm not discounting it. Fear is real. I mean, if somebody put a gun to my head, I would probably be frightened to death. But, you know, as I think about it in my professional and my personal life, you have to, if it's starting to scare you, you have to assess why that is, and then develop a way to manage it. And so, I mean, I'm not giving you a juicy answer to your question. I'm sorry, but that's just how I see it.
So you want to assess that fear before you really consider it a fear.
Yeah. And I think most of the time I turn it into opportunity, not a fear.
That's good advice. Favorite band or artist? You're into music, you're into art, so this is a loaded one. We might be here for a while.
I'm a huge audiophile. I mean, if I had to probably pick just one, I would pick Bob Dylan. It's not because he's from Hibbing or Minnesota, even just somebody that I think has fundamentally changed music of multiple genres. He's a poet in his own right, and probably because he's so damn mysterious. I mean, he's done a very good job of leading an exceptionally private life as a very, very public figure. And I admire that about him. I think it's spectacular. And I mean, if I could sit down with one person for 5 minutes and pick their brain, he'd probably be at the top of the list.
And what is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
That's an easy one. It goes like this: you make it happen. And it probably took me 10 or 12 years to figure out just exactly what that meant, because this is something my father used to say to me. It didn't matter if I had, had an accident with my car, if I had won an award, if I had done something great or something terrible had happened. Those were usually the first words out of his mouth. Well, you make it happen, man. And, one day the light bulb just went off when he said it to me. And I was like, oh, I'm really in control of my own destiny here. I can make poor choices or I can make good choices. And the results that I reap are my own. So I do make it happen. And I think that has stuck with me. And I think about it all the time when making decisions. And he had his 5 Ps: proper preparation prevents poor performance. And I passed that test a long time ago, but he still finds victims that fall short of that one. So that's a close second.
And Noah, in a few minutes here, you're a multidimensional person. During COVID, you decide to write a cookbook called It's in the Giving, which we sell at the Duluth Pack store and on our website. Thank you for sharing that with us. Can you tell us what was your thought behind that?
Well, thank you for doing that. I have loved to cook most of my life. And I've spent a lot of time over the years cooking for family and friends and writing new recipes and bringing things back from my travels around the country and around the world and trying to put my spin on them. And years ago, people started saying, can I get that recipe? And I was like, no, someday I'll write a cookbook. So I've never shared the recipes. And it was the first weekend of the governor's lockdown. And my wife lost me for a Saturday and a Sunday. I sat down and drafted the initial draft and then called a local artist friend of mine who had expressed interest 10 years prior in illustrating a cookbook. And I said, Deb, you still want to illustrate a cookbook? She's like, you got to be kidding me. So it did turn into a much bigger journey than that, hiring copywriters and layout people and going through all the extra stuff that you have to do legally to publish a cookbook and all of that. But it was something I never thought I'd get to until retirement. So I'm very proud of the accomplishment. And it certainly isn't about making money selling cookbooks. It's really about sharing the joy of good food and the kind of memories that those connections that you have with people when you break bread make.
So Noah, first of all, give us the handles so people can find you at the banks.
Okay. My Twitter handle is at NW Wilcox. So NWWILCOX. That's my Twitter handle. My email address is noah.wilcox@grsb.bank. If you want to catch me there, you can find our websites are grsb.bank and mnlb.bank. So that's where you can find us.
So not .com, but .bank.
.com will also work, but .bank is the way to go. Much more secure domain.
All right. And then where can they find the cookbook? It's in the Giving.
Well, they can, of course, find it at the Duluth Pack store. Thank you very much.
Well, what a shameless plug that was, right?
But they can also find it at itsinthegiving.com.
Itsinthegiving.com. Noah, we thank you so much for sharing your stories, sharing the journey, sharing the legacy and the heritage of a 4th generation family business with you at the leadership. And now we'll be looking for that 5th generation as we convince your children to take it to the next level. How is that? Our special guest and my friend has been Noah Wilcox, chairman of Grand Rapids State Bank and Minnesota Lakes Bank. Noah, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Tom. It was a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
It's been real fun. And folks, Until next time, unplug from the indoors and recharge in the outdoors. Outdoors, 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 outdoors.